and call the meeting to order. The Commissioner Connolly is on his way. He runs just a few minutes late. I guess it's in traffic. No from Statesville, so I'm not sure. But welcome everybody. Good to see everyone. Hopefully you let this arrange a little bit more comfortable to have a good conversation and other dialogue with everybody. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the last meeting, and pull all of that out. Jen has put a copy on the meeting items. Okay, we want to make sure that this Bible is filled up. Not giving you period. Yeah. There you go. So, those, we need a motion to approve those. Nicole made a motion for a second. Second by our other Michael. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is the public comment policy. And this is the same public comment policy that we use at the town board. And Sheriff Crawford, our attorney, recommended that we adopt the similar policy so that we incorporate public comment into our meetings and with it to have some parameters so that there's equal time for everybody to speak and allow a time that's scheduled to do that. Did everybody get a copy of that? So everybody got a copy of that? It's a little bit long, but essentially we're going to allow the same thing, 30 minutes, 3 minutes each speaker. They sign up ahead of time, and that we can ask them for the information to contact information to give to Jen and to respond to their comments. We'll have a back and forth conversation and public comments and speak, taking in the information and entering that into the record, and then we can try to ask them.
And they can also submit all their comments via email if they want to distribute it.
Any questions on that?
Policy is recommended.
All right, well, we've got a motion to approve the public comment policy as presented. Or second? Second by Bo. Now, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So we'll got that for the next meeting that we advertised accordingly. Our schedule and agenda that we've asked for topics this week is the school systems update. I'm not sure if Bowen and Carter had flipped the coin who would go first, or whose presentation is first on it. We let Tim go first.
Whatever you like me to do.
Okay, so we're going to have Walter Grade School first. See? Sorry.
That's okay.
I was getting out of this work. Welcome, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. And I'm Tim Ivey. I'm the Chief Technology Facilities and Maintenance Officer for Iredell Station Schools. And I hope you guys are having a wonderful day today. I'm going to order your county in a second. So Bowen had asked me to give a real quick presentation on residential development and its impact on school enrollment. And I know that Mooresville, you may think doesn't have an impact on Iredell Statesville schools, but it does have a great impact on Iredell Statesville schools. We have a lot of students that are shared between the two programs, and anything that essentially happens in Mooresville does have an impact one way or the other on the rest of the county. So just wanted to start off with, we have approximately 2,000 new residential units that are projected to be completed over the next 10 years. And during that time, in any given year, the estimated impact is around 793 students. Now, the overall impact could be much greater, but that's the annual impact. And as you'll see, this is a study that was done for us through predictive enrollments, which is part of PowerSchool. It calculates in birth rates, housing starts, students that are currently in the school system. It really does do a lot of analytics and then gives you kind of an impact of what's planning on happening over the next 10 years. And so as you can see, the impact for the schools total comes out to 2,809 on the far end. So there's a lot of different potential that residents new residential growth could have on our schools. The difficulty is, do these communities build out as fast as you think they are? Do they end up having as many students that you predict them to have? So it's always sort of a guessing game. It's your best guess based off of the data that you have. How does that really impact our
Can I
schools?
just ask a question real quick? I'm
Sure.
sorry to interrupt you. Is this just exclusive for the Mooresville area, or is this for the entire system?
This is done for the Iredell Statesville School
Okay,
District.
the entire system.
Mhm.
So the 2,000 is countywide?
It would be within the Iredell Statesville Schools boundary, so it may be more with the impact of what could
But
happen.
it's
in
across the
Mooresville.
whole county where you saw. Gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you.
This slide here is done from units that were actually completed as of January 1, 2022. And the highlighted areas show the schools in the southern end that are being impacted. So some of those are schools that are impacted by Mooresville developments, and some of them are schools that are impacted by Iredell County development. So, but you can see primarily in our high schools, the two southern end high schools are the ones who take the brunt of the impact. Then when you switch over to middle schools, Troutman tends to be the one that has the most that we're anticipating happening, but we also anticipate seeing growth in Lakeshore, which we have had an addition done to the elementary school because that campus has an elementary middle combination school. And so we are anticipating that we'll need an addition to that middle school to accommodate the growth that's coming in with the elementary. And then when you look at our elementary schools, Cottle Creek is anticipated to have 520 new students added to there. And then Shepherd, which we are currently in the process of having to add a mobile unit or a mega unit to that campus to deal with oversized growth. And then Troutman Elementary School is also anticipated to receive quite a bit of growth based off of houses that have been completed in 2022. So we're not sure that those are actually, as we build those out, people start to move into those homes. And with the new development that's coming, it certainly does impact our schools. And I can pause for a minute if you have some questions.
Please, question. For what time period is this?
These are the homes that were completed as of January 1, 2022.
So that would be this coming year or?
No, it's past.
This past, in other words, you're predicted, are these predicted enrollments for what time period?
This is predicted enrollments that will happen as these build out. So when these are finished homes, so this is the number of students that we anticipate will come from those built out homes as they continue to sell. So these are developments that are completed.
So you don't know the time frame.
That's right. You don't actually know with any of it because when you have a development and it's built, you may have a lot of people with young children move into it. You may not. It really just depends. It's hard for a school system to say this is for sure what's going to happen. But based off the people who get paid more money to predict this than I do, and that's their job, they're telling us that this is the numbers that we're going to see.
And this is just, if I can continue to follow up with it.
Sure.
So that 573 students that for Troutman, that's in an elementary school, right? They've got one elementary school
In that area,
in that
yes.
area. So if you were going to say, well, I'm going to go to the county and get some money to build a new school over here, when would you have to ask for that money?
Well, we've already asked for that, and Dr. Conley and the county commissioners have done a great job of already saving and putting some money aside to help us start that. And we already have a location, we believe, and, initially picked out. It hasn't been voted on.
And how long does that process take?
So that depends. There are a lot of different processes that you can use to get through a building. So there's the way that Mooresville had done, the new school that they've done with Selma Burke. They did CM at risk, construction manager at risk. Tends to go a little bit faster, but could potentially cost you a little bit more on the building side. Or you can do the standard design bid build, which is what most school districts do. And that essentially saves you a little bit of money, and that takes you a little bit longer period of time because you have to work through everything. So if we were able to start on the elementary school, you could build an elementary school in 2 years.
Doing the method that you described, the longest method.
Really essentially in both of those from once construction starts. With construction manager at risk, the construction can start much faster because the construction manager is actually part of the design. So he's ordering materials as it's going along, and they can really just jump right in about the minute that the design is complete.
Are you guys able to do straight design build?
We are able to do design build. Yeah. So we have sent a request over. I had already asked, we have not presented it to the county yet, but we are going to go ahead and ask that they give us permission to take one of the plans that we've already done and start adopting it. So we're ready to go the minute that they're ready to fund the elementary school, because we know that we're going to need elementary school in the southern end to be able to handle that.
So just a quick question, you said that Troutman would be the only one that Troutman, wouldn't Troutman have a heavy impact on Shepherd as well?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and well, that was the number that was there, but Shepherd is already overcrowded. If we don't do something in that area, we're not going to be able to sustain those numbers in any of those schools.
Other questions?
So the yellow is new students, potential total new, or is that potential?
The blue numbers are the potential number of students that could come from these units that have been built from the housing units. The yellow is just the southern end schools that are being dramatically impacted. They're the ones that are overcrowded. And if you'll look in the blue folder I gave you, there is a capacity worksheet that shows you all of our schools. It's a little too big, a spreadsheet for you guys to see. But this document gives you all of our schools from high school, middle, and elementary. And as you look through these numbers, once you start to see any school with a pink line, that means it is over capacity or nearing over capacity. Yellow means that, kind of like caution, it's getting close. And then once they turn back to green, that means something new has happened. So as you see in the high schools, once we complete the project for Weathers Creek High School, we anticipate those numbers for those two high schools that are overcrowded to go down. And that's what that green is. But you can see that this correlates with these colors here of the schools that are reaching or almost over capacity.
And can I ask for just a little leeway for several questions around land use? So how many acres is required to build, let's say, an elementary school?
So you used to have a very small site for an elementary school. Approximately 15 acres could build you a pretty good sized school. But now due to the queue lines, amount of parking that is required, and with the watershed rules, you're almost going to need to double that. So we're typically looking for 30 acres for an elementary school.
And where do you find those 30 acres when you're looking at let's say a community the size of Troutman? You don't build it in Troutman.
You do not.
Okay. So you build it outside of Troutman where you can find acreage.
That is correct.
So then what happens is that the infrastructure providers have to run infrastructure out to that school. And when you run the infrastructure out to that school, what happens between where the infrastructure starts and where the school is built?
So we typically have a lot of different, a lot of that has to do with water. And so with Iredell Water being part of our county, sometimes we find that Iredell Water already has water within that area, and they're able to provide the service that the school requires based off the guidelines for the building. And sometimes we find out that the municipality does have to run quite a bit. And what we've seen is like with Troutman, it comes off of neighboring communities that are being built out. And we end up doing partnerships with them to tie in to their build out. That's how we've been doing a lot.
Yeah, and I guess the point that I'm trying to make, and I was trying to back into it, but you took a different direction, is that once you run that line out there, it's like houses start popping up, and you need another school to be able to fill what just grew along that line that you extended. There may not be a way around that, but when you're requiring those large, how many acres does it require for a high school?
For a high school, you're looking at 100 acres.
So that's the state recommendation for 100 acres. So you got to go 100 miles to find I'm exaggerating, of course. You got to go a long distance to be able to find 100 acres to be able to build a school on. So I'm going to ask you a policy question. You can defer to Ms. Nutting if you want to. But so what are the chances that you could build a high school on less acreage than 100 acres?
You could, it just depends on the high school size. So typically, when you build a high school, you want to make sure that the school's going to be able to accommodate what you anticipate as immediate growth plus anticipated growth, just for the same reasons that you brought up. Once you build the high school, there's going to be communities that pop up around the high school because it's now there. And so if you put a high school and let's say you only need 1,200 students, we as a school system would end up being back within 5 years in front of the county commissioners asking them for an addition, which they've asked us to try not to do. So we've tried to be very good about planning much farther out and anticipating larger, growth models. So 100 is pretty standard, but you could use 80 acres and maybe build a smaller school. It really depends on what the focus of the school is. And sometimes schools are more specific to certain kinds of trades, so you can build it on a little bit smaller ground. It really based it on number of students, number of faculty, parking required, and the watershed rules that take up additional land for retention ponds that's going to limit your space for a high school facility.
So potentially the land use map in the area of the school could limit the growth that occurs between wherever the pipe runs in the school, or the planning departments would have to be aware, and of course they are aware, that houses sprout up around those infrastructure lines. So to be able to not necessarily control growth, but manage some of the growth characteristics within that sphere that school is in.
Yes, and I think that overall, holistically, which this is just my opinion, but I've been asked to be on a couple of different little studies about, what's the impact of school systems in Iredell County, and my suggestion is that we go ahead and start identifying tracts of land that we need schools, and going ahead and trying to secure those pieces of land, because there's only so much land. And with what we're seeing is a massive increase in commerce and commercial development as well as residential development, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where, based off rules, we can't do anything. Like our schools can't be expanded. We have no more place to put them. And the problem is very evident that it's coming, and so we see it. So it's kind of like, if Indiana Jones knew that big ball was going to roll at him, he would have got out of the way earlier, but instead he had to run out of the way. Are we going to be running out of the way, or are we going to get out of the way?
You're dating yourself there.
I know. But I was reading that I figured with the new movie that somebody might have gone back to watch.
Somebody else have some other questions? I think we have a little slide.
Just want to clarify, the light green line in the bottom of each section.
That's the total number of students.
Well, it says available seats,
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. That is the available seat number.
which means that if you shift the people around, you get enough seats at that point in time, but they may not be in the right place.
That is
Just want to make
true.
sure I understand it right.
You could redistrict in some cases, but the issues with redistricting is a lot of times you're going to have to send the student past the school to be able to go attend.
I get that. I just want to be sure I was reading the right line. That's all.
Can I continue or not?
Well, I wanted to your point, Lake Norman High School was built in 2002, so it's 21 years old. So for those of us who were around when it was built in 2002, we never would have imagined the growth around that area. That seemed, back in the day, that seemed like a long way out of town. So, yeah, to your point.
Yeah, so, and are these numbers, I'm sorry, man.
That's okay. We're going to try to give everybody on time.
Are these numbers in that column, the blue numbers, do they reflect the impact of charter schools at all?
So charter schools typically pull off of us, and so any of these students could attend an Iredell Statesville school, or they could attend a charter school. We have not seen as much charter school reduction in our total population. What we've actually seen is much more reemergence from charter schools. So they'll be at a charter school and go for a couple of years, and then they'll be right back in Idaho State School. So we haven't really seen a huge impact, but they do help us with some of the overcrowding. And so as some of them come about, sometimes they're helpful, and then sometimes they're not, because they may be at the charter school for 3 months and then return to a school, and we're a public school, so we certainly accommodate.
But money doesn't come back with them.
That's correct.
Thank you, Malcolm.
And then, if y'all are ready, I can move to the last part where we can discuss more. The last part is just, as you can see, we're already in need of an elementary school. We also know that we have to have an addition at Lakeshore Middle School within the next several years. We will need a middle school by 26-27 school year. We anticipate an additional middle school past that one in the year 29-30. And then if data works the way that it is leaning toward, then by 31-32, we will be need to be occupying a new high school. And our anticipation is that would be in the Cottle Creek area, because what we're seeing is if the development in the Mooresville area continues to go the way that it is, Mooresville graded, and I'm not going to speak for Dr. Garner, but Mooresville graded's capacity to serve their kids is going to be at an all-time strain. And so a school in that area would be very beneficial for the county, not only Mooresville graded, but for us too, because there's going to be a lot of students there, and they're not going to want to cross over the way the lake is to certain parts of the county. I also included our boundary maps in case you wanted to kind of cross-reference where schools were located and the overcrowding, but that's just information in case you guys need it.
Before Tim steps away, we may have some thoughts. You're able to stay full of our lead.
Absolutely.
Good. Dr. Burns?
All right, so really what we looked at, you guys, today is some enrollment trends. We're going to talk about our boundary lines as well, because that shared space with Iredell Statesville Schools in the county is a little unique. And there are some complexities as far as communities that can opt in versus grandfather versus in our boundaries, so we'll talk about that some. We'll talk about our building capacity as well as anticipated growth. So I've got several charts in there, and I won't spend a lot of time on each one, but I do want to speak to this. So if you were to ask myself or Dr. Smith in 2014 what our numbers would look like, I don't think we would have anticipated this. So that's part of the challenge, is it's like the chicken or the egg philosophy. We would have projected these numbers to rapidly move up, but expansion of homeschool and charter school, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, has impacted that a bit. So you'll see K2, we've actually dropped a bit. You'll see this through all the slides. You'll see a little bit of a dip around the pandemic as people pulled their kids out and increased in homeschool and charter school and things like that. And then you start to see an uptick back. But comparatively to the past 10 years, we've actually dropped a little bit in K2, even though the town of Mooresville has been expanding. 3-5, you'll see something similar there. We've dropped just a bit. 6-8 in our middle school range, same trend. The only area where you see a little bit of an uptick is in our high school, and that's where most of our strain is presently, because we're one high school district. So overall K-12, again, I think if you were to ask us this, if we were to go back in time in 2014 and ask where we'd be today, the prediction would have been over 7,000 students, but presently we've actually lost about 60 students in the past 10 years. This is why we think that that's the case, these next two slides. We don't get homeschool data for just Mooresville graded, we get county data, so this is ourselves and Iredell Statesville Schools together. You see a major uptick in homeschool. Based on proposed legislation in the state, I would consider that this will continue because North Carolina is a very homeschool friendly state. So you also see that uptick during the pandemic that started to drop a little bit as well. Charter school, this is just for Mooresville graded. So charter school enrollment for us has increased. So about 300 students from 2018, that's as far back as I could pull the data. Everything else goes back to 2014. But as charter school enrollment increases, those kids that live in our boundaries, that relieves a little bit of the strain for us as well. Ultimately, we want to keep those kids in Mooresville graded, but it's a unique situation for us with our capacity issues. It does help a little bit from that standpoint. This is just a high-level view of our map. One of the things that's a unique challenge for us, and Dr. Smith could probably speak to this as well, so the area, and it's hard to see up here, but that area that's striped for eligible, that means that they can opt in to Mooresville graded, and that can get complex and can present a lot of challenges with us in our Statesville schools. So there are times where communities, both of us will serve within a community. That's not efficient for us as a county, so that's something we've talked to the town about. If we could look at any type, and I'm out of my lane there, but any type of restriction on building to where when somebody's building a set of homes that they either are all in with us or they're not, because we have areas right now where both Iredell Statesville and Mooresville graded are run with us. You've got neighbors on the two different school systems. So, and really the area of eligibility is where we predict a lot of that growth to come in the future. You also see a couple little spots that are like donuts over here on our western side of our boundary. So,
Dr. Rogers, just to back up, when you talk about that, is that, and maybe Sharon needs to answer this, is that our policy decision, or is that between the two school systems' policy decision of who gets on that?
so they have to opt into the, Dr. Smith, I think you might want to speak to this on, but
It's my understanding that the two superintendents 20 years ago, Bo, and you may remember, they got together and made some kind of arrangement that the districts were drawn, but then there's a lot of these areas that could opt in. If they opt in, they have to pay the Mooresville graded school tax. And then once they're in forever. And so there was a lot of those gray areas, and the two superintendents kind of agreed on it. And so now, it really does get complicated for us when, and Dr. Gardner mentioned this, but we don't allow transfers into Mooresville graded. So it really gets complicated when somebody wants to come to Mooresville, but they're in an eligible spot, but they don't want to pay the tax, or they, et cetera.
we'll get a call every week where somebody built a home, they're leasing it or renting it, and the person that rented the home thought they were moving into Mooresville graded, but the person that built the home didn't opt into the tax, so they can't go to Mooresville graded. So that creates a lot of complexities for families.
So who makes that final decision on the opt-in? Is that
The
would be
homeowner.
easier if it's?
The person who owns the property decides if they want to be in or not. But once they're in for life.
So if somebody was going to develop a 100-home community, it would be preferable for us that either everybody opted in or everybody opted out, where we've got some developments now where some homes are in, some homes are out, and I don't think that's efficient to the county.
Is that something that we need to do, like, look at on policy level for the town to help you all with that, or it's between the school systems?
Well, I can't make somebody opt in or opt out. That's what I would say.
I think what you're saying is that if it's a development that
Yes.
comes before the town board that has 232 housing units,
Yes.
you make them decide for their rezoning which school system they're going to be in. And I don't know whether that can be. Yeah. So I think that's what, that was your point.
That would be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like Dr. Garner said, we've got these little communities in places where you've got this one in, this one out, this one in, this one out.
Yeah. And there are two other elements that go with that, I'm sorry. Is that if you build it, it must be maintained.
Mhm.
So in the case of Iredell Statesville, maintenance costs don't go down, they go up. And when you look at maintaining 100 acres versus 60 acres, there's it's a big difference because you've got all of the infrastructure to
Mhm.
serve 100 acres
Mhm.
versus 60 acres. And the school bus system travels more miles than any other transit agency in the state of North Carolina. So you're looking at considerable expense with regards to transportation, infrastructure and maintenance with any one of these ideas, and trying to figure out, because that has an impact on future budgets, and so trying to figure out how to, smooth that curve a little bit is critical.
I guess we'll put that in one of our parking lot of
Yep.
to-dos on our land use.
And we've talked some
planning
with
on those ones that are not done yet to help out. We will know which we're going to talk about now.
But this sometimes definitely is confusing. I think there's a lot of confusion around Iredell Statesville versus what we serve, and this map is, and it's not simple to understand for community members. And for our parents, and I'm sure for your guys' parents as well.
Yeah, we definitely, we have to also deal with real estate agents who
Yes.
tell folks the wrong thing. They get very, very upset, and it's a daily phone call.
Yes.
You know, I was told by my agent when I bought my house that I'm in this district, and now I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, we don't allow districts, so I mean, it is like, I talked to a family last week that they had been sending their kids to Mooresville, they bought their house to stay in Mooresville, it is not in Mooresville Grady's boundary, we don't allow out-of-district transfer. They bought the house, there's nothing we can do to help, so that can become a lot of complexity for them. And then this just talks about building capacity. I will say that from our research, once you get to about 90% utilization, that's really full for us as a school because kids don't come in nice clean pockets to where every seat's full in every classroom. And you also look at a lot of those common spaces as well. So this looks at once we open up Selma Burt Middle School, we are actually in a pretty good place as a district outside of the high school, even though it's at 84% capacity. You know, that's a school that's been built onto several times, so a lot of those common spaces and things like that are really being stretched thin at this point. And you'll also notice that the spaces in the yellowish color, those we're utilizing less because we worked with the town in the fall. We looked at building permits and future growth potential in Mooresville. And as we redrew our district lines this year, we were purposeful to leave a little bit more space at Rocky River Elementary, Mooresville Intermediate School, Mooresville Middle School, because they'll serve the southeast corner of our boundary, and that's where we see most of the growth coming in the future. So we've tried to set this up so that we don't have to keep redrawing district lines, because that's always a pain point for families. If you're doing a great job with your school, they want to stay in their school, they don't want to move schools. So at this point, outside of the high school, we're in decent shape. We are one high school town, so the talk of a second high school is not, you know, there's a lot of tradition and value and you know, excitement around one high school town, but we will have to cross that bridge at some point. And to Mr. Ivey's point, finding 100 acres will be a major challenge for us within our boundary lines. We've been talking about that as well. We've been looking, you know, we're trying to be proactive with that as well, but finding 100 acres that you could build on will be a challenge for us, obviously, right now in the town of Mooresville.
Under your percents of what's being used in any of these buildings, at what point does it become concerning? I mean, is 67% concerning, or are you looking into the future at that point then, or does it affect the education of the student when it's at 84%?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously classroom sizes have been adjusted over the years, but what does that look like and how does that play in?
I would consider 90% really being at capacity for us. So once you get over 90%, you really start to feel that strain. Another thing to consider that both of us will have to deal with, and we didn't talk about that earlier, is there's legislation to reduce class size at 4th and 5th grade that would go into effect a year from now. So that means I need more classrooms because I've got a max that's much lower. We would normally have 28 to 30 kids in the 4th and 5th grade. The max would be 24. That means I'm going to have to add classrooms, I'm going to have to add teachers, I'm going to need space for that. So that will change some of this utilization as well. But 90% is where we would really start to feel a strain. So we're a good space for now.
Obviously, there's got to be data out there. If you have a classroom size of 20 versus 30, 4 times per student, I would say that, you know, the quality education would come in.
I would say that the data actually says you really need to be under 16 before research shows that it makes a difference. I do think that it changes workload for teachers. I mean, of course. So if you've got 20 kids compared to 30 kids, the amount of work you have to do, the amount of parent communication, the amount of grading, things like that all makes a difference. Research says once you get under 16, that starts to make a real difference in academic achievement.
Ask one question, Councilman.
Sure.
How does the block schedule impact your ability to manage capacity at the high school and the middle school?
Yeah, so it wouldn't help as much at the middle school level, at the high school level, and I'm sure our Facebook is doing this as well. We can use a lot of shared spaces. We don't do that as much at this point, but we could increase our capacity some at the high school using that block schedule. Yeah.
Thanks.
And then just some other factors to consider, and I've already touched on some of this. Most of the anticipated growth is in the southeast corner, so we've tried to project and plan for that. 912 is our primary concern. We could build onto that high school one more time, most likely. I think after that, we're done with that high school. Some of our schools were, most of our schools are pretty modern. They were built with expansion in mind. In particular, if we needed more seats at East Mooresville Intermediate, we could add to that. Again, you can't add to the common space though, so where you really feel that strain is gym, media center, cafeteria, things like that. We presently do not allow out-of-district transfers. We get calls every day, and we would love to do that, but we don't want to take in students that we can't keep there. Once they come here, they want to stay, and we need to plan for future growth as well. So even though we have the seats now, we don't allow that. And then charter school and homeschool enrollment can really fluctuate and be unpredictable. There's very charter and homeschool friendly legislation that is in the House and Senate right now, so we would project those numbers to continue to move up. But a charter school can close any day, and they do. In my experience around Salisbury, we had a charter school close with no warning. Those students, they have to come back to us. So while I don't anticipate that necessarily happening here in Iredell County, we can't say if one of the charter schools in Iredell closed tomorrow, well, we don't have space. We have to have space. It's a charter school. Any questions?
Any questions for Dr. Tucker at this point?
Just one. Have you guys kind of taken a look like Iredell County did and what your future growth is?
Yeah, we were actually talking before this meeting, and we're going to utilize some of the software that they are utilizing. We have done that historically. We've done a birth rate study, but like I said, that didn't really flesh out like we had planned. But they were sharing with us some new analytics in the PowerSchool software that we can utilize, so we're going to go back and work on that.
Because I think it would be important for this group, considering what we're trying to take a look at is the decision to look at managing growth and its impact on the schools. We kind of need to know where that impact is going to occur, whether it's going to be more weighted or whether it's going to be Iredell Statesville school system. And because that's what's going to have the most impact. And right now, you don't know if we're having, how much impact we're having on each. And it looks like the impact on you has not been as great as we anticipated. Certainly not what we really
Sure.
want.
But as far as building permits, that definitely shows potential for a lot of growth.
Right.
But we will do some additional analytics and we can share that with the group as well.
That'd be great.
I don't know if it's necessarily for you or planning in general. Do we currently have in place a policy where, let's say, development of over 50 homes has to put in, donate a certain amount of land to the school district or provide a fee in lieu of? Is that something that is legally possible?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It would be
Tax fee
considered.
or an exaction.
State legislation only allows us to ensure the schools get to talk with the developers. So let's say the school districts have a plan showing where the high school needs to be located. If the developer comes in on that site, we can force the developer to talk to the school district to see if they want to sell the land to the school district instead. But that is the only thing we are allowed to do by statute with the schools at the time of the
Gotcha.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Bert, when you guys are approving a subdivision or something at a county level, what factors does the schools come into play in your vote, and are you able to adjust that vote accordingly?
The biggest thing we've done and what we're looking for the future, and I think this group here needs to look at too, we're going to change our zoning. We're going to have to increase our lot size. We're going to have to increase. But, pretty much the philosophy's been from our board, I think y'all's board as well. Someone has property, they want to sell it, they want to develop it. That's the way it's always been. Now we're where we are now. We've got to, sometimes we got to look at something different. But our thing on the county side, if we can make a lot as large as we can, make it practical, that is going to be the only thing that will help us on that side. And, instead of having apartments and stuff, we had a plan that came to us not long ago, and I asked a question, we're going to make it, it's going to be commercial, it's going to be residential. And it was a vacant community. So I asked the plans, how many houses can we build there? Is it 50, 60 versus business? So not business. Makes people angry, but they were worried about traffic. But you got occasional trucks coming in versus 50 or 16 people that live there, 2.5 people to there, got more kids going to school, so we opt on the business. So we're going to change our way we're doing things. We're already eyeing some things. Our Horizon plan that's coming up, think has some ideas they want to present to us. I think it'll be good, but I think we'll go a little bit over top.
I know from a town board perspective, this data is, I'll be honest, this is awesome. I've never been here for years and I've never seen anything like this. But, you know, from our perspective, you know, it's great. It can be right there in front of you, but from our decision making, it doesn't matter. You know, and so I guess my question is for you guys, can you guys hold that accountable? Because we can, love to, but
We can't tell people no because we don't have school capacity.
there you go.
But if we change our zoning and say, this is what you can build, these are your three options, build if you want to do that. You know, we're going to have larger lots, we're going to have it. But then you have to worry about too, what about people who can't afford a large lot? What about people who have service jobs? What about people who make $30,000, $40,000 a year? Or start out at barely $25,000 a year? Or we're going to price our kids out of the county? You know, that's a concern. We got a problem, and we're going to address the problem on the county side. And probably going to make some people mad, but it is what it is. We got to do what's right. But, you know, good Lord's not making when we're land, and everybody said that. And, you know, the biggest thing, and both of us get it, if the charter school closes, y'all get it. Y'all have to take it. There's no choice in that matter.
I'm a firm believer in this one, going back to 2% of the quality of the education. Because you pay now or you pay later. Actually, later is more expensive than now. And it's just sad that in this entire plan, what we're looking at is there's no control from either of us other than land use and, or such as that. But, I think it's a very significant factor. Especially when you see a more high school, what the percentage is, we just walked through it, it seems like yesterday. So, but just me throwing out my perspective.
But right now, when you went to look for 100 acres of land, I mean, and the developer, whoever knows that you're looking,
Yeah.
it's going to go up, it's going to double.
We've been looking, and it's going to be a challenge. Absolutely. And there are some innovative things we can do. Early college, I know Arkansas State's wise that can take a smaller strain off, and we've been looking at some of those potential ideas that early college is only going to take a small chunk of your high school population. So,
What's your timeline on updating the county meetings?
We're looking this fall, but we spoke to some of the other commissioners, and we're looking to possibly do something maybe this fall. And I know there's a lot of stuff in the pipe. There's a lot of stuff that we've already approved, that y'all have already approved as a drop in number today. It's still going to be a while, but at least you're looking ahead.
Other questions about that?
Just for postal systems, when you do your predictive analytics for capacity, last time we met, we talked about a plan proposed permitted units in Mooresville versus Statesville and Troutman for Ireland Statesville schools. The 2,000 number doesn't seem realistic to me, based on what we saw last time. I don't know what that number is based on, but when you do your analytics, you may want to do it based on what's real, what you know is happening, but also what potentially could happen. So that you have two scenarios there. Because there's been a lot of residential units that have been approved, not necessarily under construction, and that's, pending a lot of different things, but there's also some that could be used by right, there's some that have not come through the process yet, and there's some that are under construction already underway. So I think the 2,000 number, well, it gives us a number, it may not be a full accurate description of what all is there. So I just thinking through it, it would be helpful to know different scenarios, not to give you all more work, but
I would agree.
I mean, the numbers can change the conversation very quickly.
Madam Chair, yes, just to point out something. The drivers for the county are a little bit different than they are for the municipality, because the infrastructure drives the consideration of density. So, you're going to have to spend $2 million for that pipe. You can have one house on it, or you can have 30 houses on it. And so, usually in the municipal zone, you're looking for densities that make sense with regards to the extension of utilities and service delivery. And And that service delivery includes Kurt Deaton over there and the police chief over there. So, you know, the considerations, you have those same considerations maybe at just a little lower percentage, but you have to look at what are the trade-offs.
We're going to grow.
Yeah.
No way we can stop the growth.
Yeah.
But we can say, if you go out here and put an apartment complex, instead of putting 200 units, you put 150.
Yeah.
So those 50 is going to help y'all, it's going to help us, and help schools. Because right now, the schools, that's our biggest.
But there are trade-offs for either one of those strategies, and sometimes, you know, the calculus for the town's going to be a little bit different than it is for the county. And you're going to have to support each other because you understand that.
Dan, one question. I think you guys brought it up at our planning retreat that on our land use, on what, you know, the town limits are on our land use, you guys could tell the number of units if everything was built out, snapshot today. I think you're right, Eric can kind of talk about that. We're talking about from a transportation perspective, but I think just thinking from the school's perspective, that data that we can provide them to help Jen's point of doing more predictive analytics for them.
It is, it would be a range, right, because, you know, some of the land use categories are, most of them have a range in there, so it could be a significant difference in that range, and that would also assume we're building every piece of ground per the plan, which we know is not going to be true. But yes, we do have that data, we can get at least a rough guesstimate for the future, potential future, that we do have to provide.
I don't know if that would be helpful for both systems if you knew exactly what our land use looks like today. If overnight it was all built out and the ranges, what those look like, that would help for the analytics. I don't know what goes into that system to talk about, but absolutely planning can help provide that information.
Well, I think also when you guys are doing that for both school systems, you need to maybe put in a, I don't know a better word than a clutch factor. Right out of Cottle Creek right now, we have a 600-unit multifamily that was actually approved in, was it 1998? That's under construction now.
Wow.
And so we didn't have any control over that at all, didn't know it was coming. And there's other land out there that's probably like that. I'm assuming it's not unique. And so I think as we look at this, you need to kind of anticipate that there's going to be some uncertain growth that you don't know about. Just like that 600 unit, I'm meeting with one of the local residents already, and then we're going to have a town hall meeting out at the subdivision because they're building it right next to a single family subdivision and all the streets are. So you just don't know what growth is going to happen. And we didn't even know that until we had to push and find out when it was actually approved. So you just need to have that little factor in there that there's going to be unexpected building and growth as well.
Fair enough.
Other questions for the school?
This question, that's been on my mind since we heard that story last time. I mean, is there not a way, Dan, to pull that out? I mean, we're totally surprised when we don't contact those people at all to say, hey, there's approvals here. I got the impression before if there were approvals that were out there, we were at least kind of monitoring to know, is it dead or they didn't. I mean, we can't kill it, I suppose, because it's already done. But at least it should be on a list somewhere. And it sounds like it wasn't. Am I wrong?
It was on the list as a by right development, so there was no public notification process for it, so the community learned about it once trees started.
But we knew it was coming.
Yes, that.
We knew it could come.
Yes.
So we could have that list, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we could have that in front of us and say, well, here's the column of stuff that's out there and we don't know. But that's not in our monthly report either, right, Dan?
That one is it.
It is in the monthly report.
Everything we have in our shop.
Everything's in, okay.
I think that's one of the things that makes it so complex.
That's
So when that was approved in 1998, and the school system was built immediately before that, we would have had empty seats for 20 years. Like, that's the complexity.
Yes.
I understand.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next.
School system.
Our water resources. Well, water resources update. I know that the town board members have heard this ad nauseum multiple times. And we'll continue to hear it multiple times for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The town went through a recent comprehensive master planning process. We finished that up in 2021. Our previous master plan had been completed and been updated in 2009, and that showed some pretty aggressive growth, and we were planning for some major growth in the area. What ended up happening is, there was kind of an economic correction that slowed growth down in the area, coupled with a significant change in plumbing fixtures. So our projections, kind of the same thing as Dr. Gardner was talking about in the schools. You only plan as well as you can based on the information you have in hand, and we timed everything out to coincide with a reduction in water use, which was a good thing because at the time in 2009, we were anticipating having to expand our wastewater treatment plant to 15 million gallons a day within the next few years. We anticipated much more growth in the water side, and we just didn't see that happen. So we were able to kind of take a step back and work through, 10 years or so, and then come to the point where we could do a new master plan. That updated comprehensive master plan did show that we are at the beginning end of needing to do some water resources and wastewater capacity planning. But that we are at the right point to start that planning, so we're not behind. So, excuse me. And these are all overall treatment capacity numbers, so we're not talking about looking at the outskirts of our service area. But water demand projections, you can see that our average daily demand will be increasing over time, and we anticipate that, and our maximum daily demand as well. But our total treatment capacity of 18 million gallons won't be exceeded until 2050. So the state has kind of an 80-90% rule where 80% of your capacity on the water side of a maximum day demand, you should start planning for an expansion, and then at 90%, you need to be under construction with that expansion. So with an 80-90 split, you're looking at, you need to start planning around 2032, somewhere in there, and be under construction by 2040 based on the projections that we have. Our existing 12 million gallon a day water plant, we still call it the new plant, even though it's been around for 12 years, and we're going to start placing equipment at it. But our new plant is easily expandable to 36 million gallons a day, and right now its capacity is at 12. So when we get to that point in the 2030s, 2040s or so, really our biggest, I don't want to say biggest, but the hurdle that's a little bit outside of just pure construction will be we coordinating with Duke Energy on the settlement agreement that limits us to 18 million gallons a day to Jackson the Lake. And that whole relationship is definitely different than it was back when they were updating their license. So all that to say, on the water side, we're doing fairly well. I anticipate in the future we will start to implement more public education and other processes to try to get people to think a little bit more about their water consumption, what they do with irrigation. That's really the one that hits us the hardest. Our average daily demand is about 7 million gallons a day. Last summer in June, when it didn't rain for weeks, we hit 12. So, that delta really, for the most part, is people putting water on the ground. And a lot of the time, they're not doing it in the most efficient way for their lawns. So that's always a struggle in that education portion. Wastewater is a little bit different, and in general, wastewater treatment is much more complex than water treatment, so the plants have a lot more moving parts to them, a lot more stuff, science, biology behind them. Our wastewater capacity is something that we have started working on. We are working with Black & Veatch now. We've actually met with DEQ on Monday to talk about what our plans are moving forward. We have to look at our plant expansions on that same 80%, 90% rule but based on a maximum month average. So whereas on the water side, our maximum demand is typically on a dry day in the summer when everybody's wanting to use water for whatever it is they're using water for. Our maximum flows at the wastewater plant is when we have a really rainy month. So they're two completely different times and two completely different situations that create that. So we are anticipating now, based on the projections that we went through in the master plan, that we should have to start planning for a capacity expansion, whether that's an expansion of our existing plant or building a new plant, either close by to the existing or closer to the Tahoe, by 2025, and then to be starting construction in 2030. I will say that there's some bills going through the legislature right now that kind of relax some of those rules just based on some of those issues that in particular Charlotte and Concord area are seeing in terms of treatment capacity. But really in the perfect world, you would be sticking with that 80-90 rule. So if we're supposed to start planning in 2025, we actually started planning in 2023 and are starting through that process. We have to go through a very prescribed alternatives analysis on what we do, whether we build new, whether we expand, whether we coordinate with another municipality or utility. We'll have to go through an environmental impact statement. There's a whole lot of things that would have to be done in order to get that increased NPDES permit so that we can do one of those things through the federal government. So the third item, and I probably could have, I have a figure, that you'll have to just indulge me just using my arms to show you. We get our water from Lake Norman, and our treatment plant is on US 21 across from the operations center. We actually have 2 treatment plants there. Our wastewater treatment plant is on Johnson Dairy Road, and that discharges into a tributary of Dye Creek. So that's 2 different water basins as the state of North Carolina sees it. There's called the Ridge Line. The Ridge Line is basically a railroad tracks that run through town. So I don't know how many of you remember or paid attention to it was in the news fairly prevalently. 2008 or so, 2007, I'm looking at Bill because he knows very well all of these things that happened. Kannapolis and Concord wanted to expand their treatment capacity, and they do the same thing. They purchase water from Charlotte, which comes out of Lake Norman, and then they discharge into the Yadkin into the Rocky River. And there were a number of lawsuits that came into play between South Carolina and North Carolina, and basically over water rights, which we don't typically see in this area of the country, but it's a huge thing out west, and that started to become a concern for people downstream. This whole thought of I need that water too, so you can't take the water upstream and move it. So that created this whole interbasin transfer legislation and process and everything. And so the town of Mooresville has had this interbasin transfer forever. I mean, since we first had a wastewater treatment plant, it has always been what we've had. We've always pulled water from Lake Norman, and then we've always discharged on the other side. So we actually have a grandfathered interbasin transfer based on what we had in place in 1993, and this is all based on state legislation. So all that to say, we have an approved interbasin transfer to continue operating the way that we do today of 9.5 million gallons a day. So we can take 9.5 million gallons from Lake Norman and discharge it into the Yadkin Basin without any question, any concern, or anything. And we have to go through a fairly complicated calculation because we're backing out what we call consumptive use in the Lake Norman Basin. So a person that lives in Morrison Plantation and waters their lawn, that water eventually makes it back to Lake Norman. A person that lives in Meadows at Cottle Creek and waters their lawn, it's going to move over into that basin, so that's considered a transfer between the two. So interbasin transfer. So oddly enough, as we go through and project that interbasin transfer and the point at which we hit that 9.54 million gallons a day, we're right in line with when we need to be under construction with some sort of a plant capacity expansion. So here again, we're on the very beginning stages of looking at alternatives, whether we increase that interbasin transfer and expand our current plant and continue discharging as we discharge, which has its own set of concerns and issues and just a legal process to go through, or we construct a new plant and discharge back into the Catawba so that we kind of mitigate that transfer some. So that's the same type of a situation that the school systems, I need 40 to 50 acres. Typically once, wastewater plant is not something that we necessarily care to put front and center on a main road, kind of like them tuck back a little bit, and having some topography is actually a benefit because you can run things by gravity and not be pumped, it's always more efficient. But we are looking at the options now to either get a certificate from the state or go through some sort of mitigation process by transferring back over to the Catawba as well. So all that to say, it's the same kind of thing. I think we're at the right place in our planning for utilities. We're not behind, but we're not super far ahead, and it's really not something that we can't do regardless of what immediate growth projections are, because it is a long time. It's not anything wastewater in particular. We're looking at 10 years by the time we're done with that process. If we expand an existing plant, because obviously we can't shut down while we do that work. We have to do that while we're still operating the plant and keeping it compliant with all our regulatory permits. Questions?
So I think for a lot of us in the town board, this is the thing that, for the school system, you guys think $100 million on the school, this is $100 million for what? Yes. So this is what keeps us up at night, at least doesn't make of that coming soon. Bill has a question.
What a surprise. So on the water demand projections, what is your current estimate of loss right now that occurs in the pipes?
So I stick with the 10% number.
That's not bad.
That whole process has become much more complicated in terms of the water loss audits and everything. So I kind of stick with that.
Are there construction methods that eliminate or reduce the capacity for loss on new construction?
I mean, newer pipes are always going to be better. So a water loss audit, a lot of the things now that are coming into play on a loss. So the difference between the amount of water that we produce and the amount of water that we sell. Actual pipe breaks and things tend to be a very low percentage of that number. The larger percentage of that actually is under the 40 meters. Or we have to, so as I didn't really talk more about the plants, but as our system grows and developments are constructed further out towards the edges of our system, we have to maintain a certain level of chlorine residual in our pipes just for water quality. It's just by law you have to, and that keeps any sort of biological stuff from regrowing and reintroducing into the system. So by doing that, you'll see down on Route 3, there's one right by DEI. There's a little pipe that sits there, and there's a sign by it that says water quality. So we have to flush hydrants, and we have to have some locations that are constantly running water at the end of the line just to keep water moving through so that we have that water gauge down to the point that it still meets all the regulatory requirements. So
10%'s not bad anyway.
So as we move further out, that happens more and more, particularly if you have, an 8-inch line that runs out to a development that's 1 mile outside of our limits. We need to have that size pipe in order to provide fire protection. But the demand from, 100 single-family homes is not so much that we can actually turn that water over, so we have to keep hydrants running.
What about infiltration on the wastewater side, any ideas?
That's a little bit hard, depends on the basin, but we spend about $1 million annually on ionized reduction and then also on small diameter water line replacement.
Can we do anything on the ordinance side to reduce infiltration, or are there construction methods that?
So the new pipes aren't the problem, it's
Okay.
the old 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old clay pipes that, you just get root intrusion through the joints and things like that. Yeah, and a lot of the time it's on a private homeowner, so if you have a lateral coming out of your home that's got 2 roots in it, you're not gonna go and check that and fix it proactively. I mean, most times people wait until it's blocked up and then they call us, we clean it, and they have to contact the plumber and send them on to replace it.
Thank you.
Okay. Get water. Moving on to public safety.
How's everyone? So I did have some handouts and things, and gave them out in addition to the slides, so that you see the maps better, and you'll be able to see that. So we will start with, first of all, my name is Kurt Deacon, I'm the fire chief here in the town of Louisville. Grew up here, so kind of an oddity at times, but had the luxury of being the fire chief here. I really enjoy this town. So let's talk about the presentation is going to revolve around our response when we have a fire station, how annexation affects that, etc. So feel free to ask any questions. Like the first slide, the map, you have a big map of this. It has our districts. I'm going to go over what the colors mean and what that stands for. The last page in the handout I gave you is a 1710, NFPA 1710 fact sheet. This is exactly how, this is the National Fire Protection Agency, this is exactly how municipal fire departments gauge best business practices on how to respond, how long it takes them, what it looks like, etc. This is also how the insurance grading organization for North Carolina, the ISO, looks at a fire department to see how staffed they are, what kind of equipment, what kind of responses they have, and then they give a grade to the citizen who determines their insurance premium. So at the end of the day, the better the fire department is, the lower the insurance premium. The insurance premium in general is from a 0 to a 10, or a 1 to a 10. 10 being no fire protection, 1 being the high fire protection. The municipality, the town of Mooresville, has an ISO 1. When you get to 5, from 1 to 5, it affects commercial, 5 and above affects residential. So it kind of gets your head wrapped around those parameters. We look at how far we can get the big red fire truck or the little red fire truck or whatever's responding to a call for service, and we look at these timestamps. A 911 call here goes, it's answered within 15 seconds. Alarm processing and dispatch within 64 seconds. We have 1 minute after we receive the call on the radio or dispatch to get to the truck, be dressed, and on the truck. Our goal is 90% of the time to respond in 4 minutes with 1 truck. The colors on this map are 4-minute GIS responses from if the truck's at the station. When you look at a structure fire, or a business fire, house, or whatever it is, we respond more than 1 big red truck to it because there's multiple tasks to do. 1710 wants you to respond to second due within 6 minutes in the full alarm assignment, which in our case is 3 engines, a ladder, and a battalion chief within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. So as you can see, collectively, you have a fire station. Just when you have a house fire in number 2 district, you probably get a response from number 5, number 2, number 4 and number 1, for example, so you get a collective response. And so, again, 1710 is for career fire departments. Our normal staffing per day is, our maximum staffing per day is 36. It's going to go up a little bit once the budget is approved, so we'll have a little more members. Our average staffing is about 29 people. That's what people out on vacation, leave, et cetera. So we have about 29 staff a day today to respond to this. And if you look on the 17th sheet, you look at how many people it takes to do whatever. You can look at that. Any questions here? All right, so I took 2022 calls for service and I overlaid them in a GIS. I plotted every call we ran. I overlaid it into the GIS to show hotspots, heat maps, etc. for what we're doing, what we did last year. We're in this year. This year wouldn't have been a full calendar year, so I didn't use it. Things I look at, so I get an email about annexation, and y'all can make comments on it. I look at, so ISO looks, if you're not within 5 miles, it's automatically. So we don't want to take anything in over 5 miles. I mean, nobody does. That's statewide. So the next question I ask is the annexation within the 4 minutes? And that's that first map you looked at. Is it within that? And is the combined annexations in that whole area, is it going to allow equitable service? So as we continue to get more annexations in the area, you know, I try to talk to the board. One house does not necessarily mean build a fire station. But collectively, when we look at that, there's a point where it triggers. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's 10 houses. I'm not going to say it's 200 houses. But collectively, I look at data, and as we get more and more calls in this area, as the population grows and their density grows, you're going to have more calls in here. That's just how the business runs. So we look at these. If we look at this information, we ask, these are some of the questions that we answer when we go for an annexation. And then the third piece we really look at is the capability. So this, the thing in black here talks about call responses and overlapping calls. So in 2020, we had about a 47% overlapping. So that means when the closest unit may not be available because they're on a call, so we send the next closest unit, which extends the response time. So that happens in 2022, it happens 58% of the time. So 58% of the time, I have a truck on a call. Or I'm sorry, I have 2 calls at once. That call may require 1 truck, that call may require 4 trucks, depending on what type of call it is. So one thing that we use to judge that is, you know, how many talk about building a fire station, we also talk about staffing the fire station and what you're going to put in it to respond. So we look at overlapping responses, we look at the availability. For example, our engine 2 west side, I-150-77 is the busiest truck. So it probably it's on a call more than the other trucks are. So when it's on a call and there's another call in their area, I've got to send them adjacent so the response is longer. And so it's a cascading effect. I have 3 calls at once and I'm even further out. And so our goal is to hit that 4 minutes 90% of the time. That's what we're shooting for. I guess one thing I do want to talk about, I'm going to go back 2 slides and I'm going to talk about this map that you have. And then I'll be done. You see, I'm going to talk about colors. If anybody cannot distinguish the colors, let me know. So there's a really dark color that's outside the city. That is county property. There's a lighter tan color that is city property. I'm pretty sure most people in the room understand that. And there's portions of city property not in the ordinance. So we look at that, as we build developments and we connect them, then the response kind of fills in at times, because if there's not a road through it, it's going to show not in the 4 minutes. And as we connect communities, the response time actually reduces sometimes. So as we continue to build and add units and developments, it's positive from our aspect to connect it. I want to bring out that. We also do predictions on future stations and locations. And for example, we put in Station 6, it took some of the burden off of Station 1. That's the new station, I know one. It took some of the burden off of 1 and it gave us a better response to the 150 east over the Farm Highway area and the industrial park. So it really helped a lot to take that reliability, that last slide, and turn it into, it's more reliable in the area. It's not as tied up.
To your point on the Station 6, where it's got the big brown spot right next to it, is that because it's not connected? Why that's
So that, if I'm not mistaken, that is the industrial park itself. It's because that land is not going over it. So right beside the fire station, that little L, that is the road, that is what's on the GIS at the time. All the lands just, they don't have a parking lot or a road.
So it's
Then
not
the computer
connected to
sees.
something.
So it's fully, it's in that development.
Questions for? Obviously, you've seen the numbers for the 22 responses, 97, 10, we're going to sure get, when you get to the end of the numbers for 23, will be well over 10,000 calls.
Yeah, I think we've adjusted a little bit of that. We're trying to balance that out and make some changes, a little bit of reduction, things we've done, but we still have lots of things. We're gonna be 9,000 at the end of the day. I know we'll climb 1,000, but we're still there. And you notice the black cutout piece, if you're running 4,000 plus responses a year, overlapping calls, may occur hourly results, time of day. During the day, whoever works here, your side. Thus requiring responses from adjacent stations frequently transfer or move up for required, so you're seeing trucks out there. They must be required to be located with redundancy and backups to achieve the stated travel time. So that's constant. I call it chess piece move. So you're constantly doing this all day long.
And your, the monthly report this week, the brush survey breaks out, what's non-fire related. So I think what 60% of it non-fire related, and it probably broke down to car accidents.
So the non-fire is
Traffic.
medical and car accidents, and we try our best. We have a little red truck area, which is a small vehicle that runs some of our medical stuff. We shave about 25% off of 65 to try to keep the truck with the water on available for fire or wreck.
And the increased issues with traffic, obviously, that's numbers that I'm watching, see what's traffic accidents. Questions for the chief?
Chief, what's I know from my hat, like the last 24 hours, we've had 21 calls that I can see. One average day, is that right?
20 to 30 calls, 20, 30 runs a day. Now, I understand when you see that, you're on that's a call, but that call may require 5 trucks, that call may require 1 truck. So you see, there's a lot of movement. With a structure fire, it's going to require a lot of movement. And then there's other pieces are left uncovered, so I've got to figure out that I'm moving another truck to cover center town or go out from there. Because it's all about time. We're fighting time every day.
That's the weather. The wind blows 15 miles per hour. I hear you a lot of.
Yeah.
Just impressive.
A lot of move parts.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Chief, do you have a
So, good morning. Some of these didn't get on. You should have a handout of the additional zones, what we projected. So, this is how they currently are set up. What our control zones are now, they're 8. This is the map from the town of future growth. As you can see, the orange are the projected projects that require rezoning, and the greens are the ones that are projects that are currently under construction now. And then this is what we use as a design criteria for increasing our control zone. So as you'll see, they only increased technically by 1 from 8 to 9, but we've expanded the districts to include what is going to be the future growth in these areas, so they've expanded. Additionally with this, the way this is designed, as we move forward, there'll be 2 cars in each district. Now there's 1 and there's overlap. But this will allow us to project for the future call volume that we're going to have. It's sort of, and also safety issue, obviously, for officers. We don't want people running from different parts of the city to try to get up with officers on that, in addition to, so we send 2 cars to everything. Anyway, every call, we send 2 cars. Every traffic stop, we send 2 people. So when we make a traffic stop, there's another car that's sent to back that person up. That wasn't done prior, back 4 or 5 years ago. But we do that. So we send 2 cars to everything. It's a safety issue for us. And so we've changed that. The additional zone here that you'll see, you see number 5, the sort of smaller part of the area. So that's the downtown district that I've been talking about this for the last 3 years. So we're talking about, and this has gotten sort of, there's been a misconception with this. So we're putting officers on foot in the downtown area down here for the businesses and stuff that operate. And those officers are going to work like the other officers do at night. So they're going to work 12-hour shifts from 6 to 6. So because we have PSOs and public safety officers that handle downtown areas now, the clientele and what goes on during the daytime is certainly different than what happens at night. So we're going to have walking officers, 2 people down in that area when the bars are open, when the restaurants are open. You know, if you're statistics, if you believe in statistics, some people are very heavy in statistics. I am too. They will tell you, and I've mentioned this to the board in the past, statistics will tell you if you have 1 incident, so let's say, for instance, somebody from out of town or anybody in town, and it doesn't matter, goes to say Epic, have dinner, and they come out and their car gets broken into and their windows smashed when they come out. Statistics say that business, so Epic, that 1 incident will decrease they'll go down 15% in what they had for customer base. Because what happens is somebody goes home and they call their friends, and now they get on social media, right? I think everybody does. How was dinner last night? Oh, it was great. But when we came out, our car got broken into. Oh, thanks for telling us. We're not going there next week. We're going to go. We're not going to go. So there's a ripple effect to that. So we don't want that to happen in Mooresville. In fact, we just got a grant under the COPS grant to do that. We're also going to put a substation down here. Those officers are going to work out of the substation down here, so they'll be available to anybody, merchants or customers or people or anybody. But on top of that, so after about 11 or 12 at night, when it clearly is more of a ghost town down here, that additional district is going to allow these officers now to get back into their cruisers and cover these areas down here that have been sort of the under reported and feel like they've been sort of disenfranchised a little bit, want to get out into those areas where some of the lower income spots, so we can be visible, we can be in those areas at the times when most of the crimes are happening. So that's why you'll see the expanded, it goes down past the Linos and over, it's hard to see on this, but to take in sort of this whole downtown area so that we can give them the services they need to, which is an added layer that they don't have now. And this is also, we've also have in mind, we've been working on this for a couple of years, so for us, it really isn't anything new. We also have in mind what we're going to do when the east-west connector comes in. Whenever that happens, we have some plans, future plans for that. We may have to tweak these a little bit, depending. But for the most part, this is how it's going to look. But I wanted you to understand that when you say, well, how come Mooresville's increasing, population's going up, calls for service are going to go up, how come you only increased when this really did expanded out into those areas that we have. And for call by, just so you know, we handle right now, we handle about close to 90,000 calls a year for service, which is about 550 to 600 calls a day if you're looking for average calls. So we, you know, of course, we anticipate that will increase with the growth. Obviously, it's hard to project. The last slide here, and this can be a little confusing too. So we did this last year. We only did it up to August. But these are based on the numbers now. So in case some of you are numbers people, you look at this and so for instance, you look at 1 West and you say, well, you get 6,700 calls for service in there. Why is it going to 335? How come it? Yeah, we had an 80% decrease in crime. I want you to know. So, I mean, that doesn't happen. I'm just saying that this is on the numbers now and the areas that they are now. So these numbers are really more for us, so we can anticipate. And then the big number I also want to show you just so you know. Again, these numbers are more for us, but we wanted to share them so you can understand sort of our methodology here. In Zone 2E, this was done when the station was still on West Iredell, you'll see 13,776. So seems like a lot, but that takes into account walk-ins to the PD that people come in file complaints, or anytime there's a drug investigation and any drug bites, we don't put the location when we have to log in evidence. They don't put the location of file until the case is over because that's all public record. So we put the PD's address. So that's why those numbers seem skewed a little bit. So just so you understand those, because I'm sure that if I looked at that would be the questions I have. So we've increased. Back in 19, we had 81 officers. We currently have 107. When they built the new station, that station is designed for 165 officers as far as locker rooms go. That's what we figured we would need over the course of the next 5, 7, 8 years, somewhere in that period. We figured that would handle, and again, we will adjust that as we move out, and as the commissioners know, because they were part of this, that building has been designed where if we need to add on, we can add on right there. We don't have to build another station or anything like that over the years. It was designed, and the building and how it was constructed and the land that it sits on was designed to just add on for any future growth.
When do you propose that it's going to be implemented?
When?
Yeah.
Probably when we're basing on growth and when these developments start to come in. You know, like we mentioned Tattle Creek. Somebody mentioned Tattle Creek. We were just talking about that the other day because I drive by that every day coming in. I'm like, holy cow, you know. And so when those are up and running and they get occupied, then we'll start implementing this now. And it's a slow burn. It's hard because, you know, we try to be, you know, good stewards of money too, right, for the town. And we held off on some growth, and we held off on hiring some people. So for instance, if I have, and we've done some different things, just so you know, it goes a little beyond what you asked, but I think it's all part of the same plan. I think we have like 7 openings right now. We have 4 people we just hired. We're doing some more interviews this week. But, you know, when you have openings, if I have, say, 10 openings, you know, it's hard. I have a hard time asking for that money because we have to fill those positions first. So a lot of times we would do a half-year budget, like maybe put that money in, if that's what you need, we put a half-year budget rather than I have a hard time asking for those positions. We haven't filled the one, but I think that's got to be responsible to do that. And I have a real hard time doing that, so we try to anticipate as much as we can. So it goes to that question, like, when are we going to do that? That'll be a slow burn, like I said, implement it slowly, but we know that we have enough to cover it in that interim, and a lot of times, like I said, we do have your budgets with the anticipated people we're going to need.
And so with the downtown plan, is that part of the whole growth plan? Or
It is, and we've been not doing this yet. We've been talking about this, when we're gonna do it, when it's important to get it done, and how we're gonna do that. And we just got the grant to do that. So we get the COPS grant to hire 4. And that has also given us some flexibility because of the way things have been going across the country, and they can't hire, and police hiring has been horrible, and places are down 300 police officers and things like that. So this grant, as most of it was a 3-year grant, however, we had 5 years to implement it because they know nationwide it's been hard to get officers in. So they've given us 2 extra years to do that. So we have the grant, the money's been, but we haven't touched it yet, and we didn't call for it this year either. And so, but we're going to put those officers in place next year for next year's budget. We'll start spending that because then it'll start our 3-year period on that grant.
And for what the plan to, when the Zone 5 will roll out, is as soon as you can get the folks hired?
Yes, so when we get those, they should be in place by next July, hopefully, yeah.
Just takes a while. And I think for, some folks don't realize, when you hire for a shift, it's not just one person.
Right.
Yeah, same thing with the fire department. The fire department for a shift is 3, it's a career.
Yeah, we have 2 on each side, plus we have 2 overlapping shifts, so really 1 position doesn't really help us, really 4 is what, and then everybody gets something, so our department really has 3, we need 4 for that, so really, yeah, 1 doesn't really help us very much. I mean, it does, it looks okay in the overall numbers. When you break it out, it doesn't give us really what we need.
And then as this map is expanded for some different areas, and you mentioned you usually have 2 on patrol in each region each time, or at all times, is there a point where that expands to there's 3?
It could, I mean, we'll have to see, again, that these are so fluid. It'll have to be based on call volume. If we got a certain area that really is, and if we have to start pulling officers from other zones to cover that, or 2 are here, now we're getting calls, we're gonna have to adjust to that.
Then it's back to just tying in the schools, with the new school, if we have 1 or 2, like for the summer work center, how many officers?
So we have 1 there, and we just hired that one. Well, the school committee got a grant for that, and so we're gonna have somebody there ready to go when that opens up, so, yeah.
Other questions, Mr. Chief? All right, good. Gets down to all of our presentations and have some discussions of next steps and other presentations that we may want to see. We're circling back to the agenda printed off for everybody again, the whole purpose of why we're here about the growth management and what all goes into the amount of growth and what we can do or can't do for controlling growth. So in relationship to that, is our going to open it up for discussion of what you all want to see next. We'll hear from
Just as a resident, I'd like to thank the chiefs, both of them, water and sewer folks, all the great work they do in keeping everybody in a healthy and safe environment for the most part in the Northwest Region.
Comments, questions about anything from today? If not today, what do you want to hear from next going forward for, again, our task at hand of the items we want to dig into, separating what the 4 criteria are?
So what we got today, we got a lot of information from different perspectives from these 4 groups. You could summarize what that tells us about the issue that we're dealing with. I'm not prepared to do that, I'm not offering it, but it seems to me like, as we've taken all of that in, it would be good to be able to say, well, what areas via the state's view of property rights and our ability to work within the statute to manage growth, what areas that we hear from these groups, if any, are helpful meeting for our criteria. That would be, I don't know how you put that or who puts that together, but it looks to me like that, just to make the most out of the time we just got, besides everything looks great, is to try to figure that out.
Bill, I'm gonna point out to Bill, because Bill had kind of said the same thing about how we just kind of do a quick bullet point of what issues do we learn and what can we do.
And I agree with that, and maybe we just need to take some time at the beginning of the next meeting or something, but yeah, I had kind of gone down that same road of thinking about kind of like findings of fact from each one of these things, that we can kind of all agree on and discuss and add to and take away and value that will lead us to whatever the conclusion is that this body is going to take. So I agree with you 100%. That's an activity I think that we need to undertake, and that everybody in this group needs to be involved in discussing. Because, it's like, well, what did I learn? Or what did I hear? And then, it's what we need to discuss.
Kind of what are our options and what's written down.
Yeah, right.
What meets the statute and what is Xed out that we can't get.
Yeah, because, and I made a list of some of the things that we had talked about at the last meeting that kind of struck me is that, that one map that I guess John produced, that heat map that showed that for every hot area, there was a project proposed. They just hadn't received the funding that they were allocated from the state to be able to start them. So that, and then the concept that because of that, these congested areas force traffic onto some of the roads that aren't designed for that kind of traffic and create that network effect. And that's not gonna get relieved until those projects are in place. So, I mean, those are things that you don't have any control over, but you're in a position to say, well, gosh, there's a project out there to fix it. We just need to keep, pushing ahead. So there's several of those kinds of things that we learned at the last meeting, I think, that are important. And then, things that we picked up at this meeting that we probably ought to discuss as we move into what Bert was saying, talking about those 4 criteria. I would agree with it.
Can somebody do that? What's our name?
So I think Jen's got she kind of started with this summary, and I think with the summary from this one.
So that was kind of the thought process, was to summarize the meetings that we got, the information. And then the next meeting, the thought was, we had talked about going 1, 2, 3, 4 through those questions. So just had it planned was that 1, we would go through and kind of talk through and develop findings of fact for number 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. So it's kind of the thought process for that.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
And all of these presentations and every piece of paper that you have is on that growth management, or will be by the end of today, on that growth management website. So if you have something you want to either share or look at, you can download it from that website too.
And that's, by the way, the town website, right? That's right. But has all
I may have picked up one thing, and then, I may have picked up something else that I hadn't even thought about. And I think it's good for us to kind of get all that stuff going.
Is there, so it doesn't sound like I've not heard very about any other presentations that we want to see with them. So at our next meeting, is everybody okay with, Jen's going to put together another, we'll find with this, and then we'll just going to take for that, and we'll start with 1 and match up the findings that we have for each one, and be ready to kind of summarize all of it back to the town board. Now, it's getting into vacation times and travel times, all that school being out, the big party week for you guys, this week together next week, right? You have a proposed date?
I do, but it's just another.
We're still not here, we're
So,
still in.
the two proposed dates I had were Tuesday, June 6th, or Thursday, June 8th. Or if we wanted to go another week, we could go the 13th or the 6th.
I would be unavailable on the 6th, but I would be available.
8 works for me, Tuesday.
What time is that?
The lighting on top seems like it's the best for everyone.
That works better for me.
I'm not available 6th, I can leave.
How about the 13th, Tuesday the 13th, does that work better for anybody? That's the
13th.
Is everybody good on the 13th?
Yeah, that works for me.
13 wins.
Wow. I'm gonna plan everything on the 13th. Just answered one.
Adjust your calendar.
So, you know, and we may well be able to move through these to finish up with some answers that day and a recommendation back that we can go if it's not, and we can just stay to the meeting, that's fine too. Well, it would kind of pencil out the 9 to 11, I think that's probably, but and then that way we can, or is anybody opposed to starting earlier, or is that?
It's not much schedule like the morning, and I went to the shower.
Shower schedule is very
Cool.
close.
So, very good. Anybody else, any comments, questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, Tom made that motion, and Michael seconded it. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Great, great job, guys. A very, very safe holiday weekend.
I think it's a high level of professional.